This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Aboim, welcome everyone. Tonight is our last year before Tisha B'Av. So we want to talk about a topic which is relevant to this time of the year. It's somewhat of a painful subject, a very sad topic, and a topic that every Jew has to be aware of. Nobody should ever be in such a situation, and yet it's something that we should be cognizant of. In 1942, the Slobodka Yeshiva, together with other yeshivas, were gathered in a very sorry place, in a very mournful and dreary place, and that is the Kovna Ghetto. And their days were numbered. The Nazis had already blitzkrieged through Poland, and Jews who actually lived in Poland tried to escape, and they came to Alita, but it was only a matter of time before the Nazis caught up with them. And you had in the Kovna Ghetto a collection of old-time Gedolei Yisrael. You had the Slobodka Mashgichim. You had somebody by the name of Rabbi Avram Grzinski, the author of the Torah Avram. Torah Avram is one of the classic Sichos Musar of Slobodka. And you had in the Kovna Ghetto Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yimkoim Damai. And when I was in the learning in Eretz Yisrael, I had the privilege to meet Rabbi Yitzchak Grzinski, the son of the Rabbi Avram, the Torah Avram's son. I believe the Torah Avram was a brother-in-law of Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe. And in this very sorry place, and in a place where people realized their days were numbered, in fact, the Nazis had basically gathered and collected all the Yidden from all the homes in the Kovna Ghetto, and the last home remaining was the home where these Gedolei Yisrael were gathered. And Rabbi Avram Grzinski, who was a prince of a man, a very elegant person, I heard many times from Rav Victor Miller, Zeches HaLevracha, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Avram Grzinski, that the Slobodka Mashgiach, he would speak very clearly and very slowly, and he paused between every word to give people a chance to contemplate every single word that he said. And it took time to get used to the way he spoke, because, we, certainly in America, we live in rapid fire. We like to hear, and what did he say? I don't know. That's an American style. Back in Europe, the Talmidim had to train themselves to actually think and integrate every word. In fact, just as an aside, in Slobodka, when they daven, there was no singing. They Beshita held it was usher to sing. And if you think about it, you say, what do you mean I get so inspired when I sing during davening? Really? Let's think for a minute. So you're singing Kaddish, right? You're singing Kedusha, and you're singing a niggin, chveist, of one words, and you're putting it to other words. So what exactly are you thinking about? You're thinking about the words that the original niggin belongs to. You're just having a very high feeling. That's not real inspiration. The Balei Musar held that the way to daven on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the nusach was not Umavir Yoim Umeivilai. The nusach was Umavir Yoim, because they felt that the niggin would take away from the focus of the meaning of the words. Okay, different mahalchim. Rav Miller writes that when he was in Slobodka, during Yom Naroim, when they would say the words, the roof literally shook off the building. It's a tremendous experience. Well, here you have in this house, you have Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yimkoim Damai, and you have Rabbi Avram Grzinski, and Rabbi Avram pleaded with Rabbi Chanan to give a shiur. Give a shiur under those conditions. The Nazis were coming any moment. It was just a matter of time. And Rabbi Avram said, okay, it's not a time for clarity of halacha, but at least give us a shiur relevant to Yana D'Yoma about the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And in fact, Rabbi Chanan prepared himself, and he came out and he gave shiur about the mitzvah of sanctifying one's life for the sake of Hashem. And after that, Rabbi Avram Grzinski gave a very moving Musar Shmuz on the subject as well. And the Torah Avram, and the Hakdama of the Torah Avram. Now the question is, who survived this episode to even tell us about what happened? Well, there was a tzaddik present there. His name was Rav Mordechai Zuckerman, who was a student of the Chavetz Chaim. When I was in Eretz Yisrael, I had the schus to meet Rav Zuckerman on 2 occasions. I got 2 brachas from him. And he was there in the Kovna Ghetto, and he reports what happened. He said, it shook us to the core, but it strengthened us at the same time. To see such majestic personalities, to have the composure in their last moments of life, to be able to think about a sugya and give over the halacha and the das Torah, it was an incredible experience. Well, another survivor of that very difficult period was a famous Rav by the name of Rabbi Ephraim Oshri, the author of the Shas Tshuvos Mimamakim. Shas Tshuvos Mimamakim was a collection of responsa about the Holocaust, where some of the most gruesome and bitter questions were asked of him during those very difficult times. And he writes that he heard in 1942 from somebody who was in the Kovna ghetto, by somebody by the name of Rabbi Eliyahu from Warsaw, who had escaped from Warsaw, and he came to Lita, that Rabbi Chanan was there, and Rabbi Chanan's son, Rabbi Naftali Benish, was there, and Rabbi Chanan was teaching his son the bracha to make when they take your life away. That's what we can imagine. A father is being melamed Torah to his son. He's teaching his son the nusach ha-bracha, what bracha to say when he has to be mekadesh Shem Shamayim. And he gave over to him the nusach of the Shlah HaKadosh and the nusach that Rabbi Chanan was makabel from the Chafetz Chaim. And Rav Ashri writes that Rabbi Chanan would tell people, you have to understand, we're preparing ourselves to be a carbon. And a carbon, if you have an improper thought, it makes the carbon noiser, it makes the carbon piggle. And therefore, Rabbi Chanan was sort of reminding the people that their thoughts should be completely pure on that occasion. So first we want to discuss a halachic shaila. This is shaila is raised in the Shas Tshuvos Mimamakim of Rabbi Ephraim Oshri. And he writes, he paraphrases the pasuk in Yirmiyah, if only my head would be water and my eyes a source of tears to cry for the Yidden who were butchered by the Nazis, Yimach Shemai, on that very black and dark day. It was the 8th day of Cheshvan, 1942. He says, my soul melts away, my heart disintegrates, thinking about the men, the women, the children, the old men, the babies, who Nebuch were in their mother's arms, and the enemy knew no mercy. Well, says Rav Ashri, on that day, the Nazis gave a command that everybody needs to leave the home, because there were a few homes left, there were inhabitants, and go to the central square. The name of the square was Migrash Hadamakarti, the Demakart square. And the Nazi said, anyone who doesn't show up, Achas Dasai Lahamis. And says Rav Ashri, you can't even imagine the crying, the moans, the painful, sorry tears that people emitted on that fateful day. They knew they were not going to the center square to be awarded, rewarded. They knew what their fate was going to be. And says Rabbi Asher, on that day you could see parents taking their little children. You could see old men and women being carried, being supported by their families, crying in understanding what their fate was going to be. Says Rabbi Asher, on that day, it was pouring, it was a very stormy day. And it was a freezing cold day, it was the winter. And the rain turned to snow, and it was as if the heavens themselves were shedding tears. It was as if the Malachei Hasharis were crying, Aye Makam Kavoda, where's the Rebbeinu Shalom? Says Rav Ashri, and on that square, there were 30,000 people. 30,000 people. This was in the beginning of the liquidation. And they were waiting for the Nazi to show up. His name was Ruka, and he was going to select, who goes l'chaim and who goes l'maves. Says Rav Ashri, coming over to me was a man by the name of Rabbi Eliyahu Varshava, who's somebody who escaped from Warsaw, figuring maybe he'll get away from the Nazis, but the Nazis had caught up, and he came over to me. He realized that he saw the Nazi progression. He knew wherever they went, they just wiped everyone away with very few survivors. And he knew his days in this world were numbered. And he came to me to ask me the following halachic shaila. When the Nazis take his life, what bracha should he make? Can you imagine such a thing? Imagine someone had the wherewithal to want to know what text to use when you make a bracha. Do you make the bracha al kiddush Hashem? Or do you make the bracha lekadesh Hashem? And he says, first of all, this question has two parts to it. Number one, he wants to know himself, that when the time comes, what is the correct text of the bracha? And number two, he says, he wants to be mekayim a mitzvah. Maybe it will be the last mitzvah of his life. What will the mitzvah be? The mitzvah of harbatzas Torah. He wants to go around maybe in his last day and teach the people the correct nusach habracha. People say, the bracha. Do I say al, le, what's a nafkamina? No, you see these yidden, even on their last day of life, the only thing they cared about is how to pronounce the bracha, al or le. So that was the shaila, says Rav Ashri, that I was asked by Rabbi Eliyahu Varsha. So my Rabbi said, let's discuss the shaila. Nobody should ever know of it. But again, Torah hi v'lomaid anu tzarach. And as we're going to see, we'll say it now, in the final Maramakim, there's a halachic sefer from Rabbi Yosef, the Yosef Oimetz. The Yosef Oimetz was written by Hagoyin Rav Yosef Yuspa Hen Norlingen. And he writes that a very important idea. He says in his opinion, Al Daiti, mitzvah rabba l'chol adam, it is a very great mitzvah for every person. V'karov l'chiyav, and it's kemat, an obligation. Lilmoid kol hadinim hashayachim ladine yehareg v'al yavar, to know the halachos of when to give up your life. He says, first of all, there's a very fine line when you're mechuyev to give up your life and when you're not allowed to give up your life. And if you're mechuyev to give up your life, then you have to know what to do. And if you're not allowed to give up your life, then he says if a person does, it's karov le'abed atzmei ladas. It's kemat suicide. So it's a shaila that has very drastic ramifications that people have to be aware of. But then he says, let me tell you another reason. This is my own reason why it is critical to learn the halachos of Kiddush Shem Shamayim. Because there's a famous question. A Jew comes down to this world for a short amount of time. To Mekayim 613 mitzvahs. The only problem is, many of the mitzvahs one never has the opportunity to fulfill. Certainly when the Beis HaMikdash is not around, we can't bring karbanos. There are many mitzvahs we're not able to fulfill. But says Rabbi Yosef Oimetz, the same way, if you learn the halachos of being makriv a carbon oila, it's considered as if you brought an oila. And if you learn the halachos of any mitzvah in the Torah, it's considered as if you were makayim that mitzvah. So too says the Yosef Oimetz, if a person learns the dinim of Kiddush Shem Shamayim, then it should never come to such a thing. The Rebbeinu Shalom will consider it as if he passed the ultimate sacrifice. In other words, Achar Me'av Esem Shana, if a person learned Be'iyun, the halachos of Kiddush Shem Shamayim, then it's ki'ilu kiyamtia b'chol pratev v'dikdukev v'chav naseh. So we hope by learning these halachos, Rebbeinu Shalom should consider it ki'ilu, we should get the schar, and we should never know of such a circumstance. But the shaila, first of all, is, do you make a bracha? After all, you don't make a bracha on every single mitzvah. You come to an ani, and the ani says, give me money. So I don't know if it ever happened to you. I remember one time I gave an ani a dime, and he kindly returned it to me. So here I thought I was doing a mitzvah. That's all I had. But I wasn't mekayim the mitzvah because the ani wasn't mekabelet. So one of the reasons why we don't make a bracha on tzedakah is because, you don't know if you're going to be successful. Do you make a bracha on Kiddush Shem Shamayim? So first of all, is it a mitzvah? Which mitzvah is it? It's a pasuk in the Chumash. It's a pasuk in Parshas Emor. The pasuk says, "V'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael." You should sanctify yourself among the b'nei Yisrael. Says the Rikanti. The Rikanti was a Rishain, and was a great Mekubal. He says, "Hamakadshim es Hashem," someone who has the opportunity to sanctify the name of Hashem, chayavim levarech. You must make a bracha. Al kiddush Hashem hanichba v'anoira, because it's a mitzvah d'oraisa of nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. And this is the psak of the Shla. The Shla writes that mi shaba liyadoi kiddush Hashem, the Shla in Shar ha'oisiyos, ois aleph emes emuna, someone who it comes to him, the mitzvah of kiddush Hashem, he's mekayim the mitzvah saseh v'nikdashti. By the way, adds the Shla, only in the presence of 10 yidden. Now you have to know, there are 3 situations where you have to give up your life. For Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shvichas Damim, one has to give up their life even if nobody's around. If it's a Shas Hashmad, if it's a time when they're trying to take away religion, one has to give up their life, even for any mitzvah, even privately. if it's befarhesia in front of 10 Jews, even if they say, talk by chazaras hashatz, otherwise, you got to give up your life. In other words, if it's befarhesia, if it's in front of a rabbim, then it doesn't matter the severity of the particular avera. So the shlosh shita is you only make a bracha barabim, because the mitzvah d'oraisa the pasuk is talking about is v'niktashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. Certainly, you still have to give up your life b'shas hashmad privately, and you have to give your life privately for avodah zarah, but you would not make a bracha on that according to the shla. And says the shla, what bracha do you make? Remember, the shaila of Rabbi Yomi Varsha, was it al kiddush Hashem or lekadesh Hashem? The shla says neither. The bracha is lekadesh shemoi barabim. The bracha is asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lekadesh shemoi barabim. And the Pischei Tshuva brings down the psak of the shla that the correct text is lekadesh shemoi barabim. So the kasha is, wait a second, you can make a bracha on Kiddush Hashem? The same way we said, you don't make a bracha on tzedakah, because maybe the ani won't be makabel the tzedakah. And the Magen Avram, the Rashba paskins, that even though there's a mitzvah d'oraisa for dayanim to judge a case, you don't make a bracha when you judge a case, because could be you have two bali dinim in front of you. Maybe they'll be moichel each other, so they won't need the services of the dayan, and therefore you don't make a bracha on din because it might not be relevant. So frek de marav sinigra, why do you make a bracha on Kiddush Hashem? Maybe at the last moment the Rasha will change his mind and will say, you know what, get out of here, get lost, I'll get you a different time. It's possible. So since it's possible, why don't you make a bracha on, in fact, some even say, why don't you make a bracha on sleeping in a sukkah? There is an opinion you don't make a bracha, because you might not fall asleep. So then why do you make a bracha on Kiddush Shem Shamayim? Maybe you will never come to it. So Rabbi say the Shla himself addresses this question. Look at number 9. The Shla says, Ein loimar ki ein levarech berachas Kiddush Hashem. Don't make a bracha ki ulai yachzar hamal v'yiftarenu, that maybe the Rasha will change his mind. You know why? Says the Shla. Because even if a miracle happens, and the guy doesn't take advantage of the opportunity, and the person's life is saved, like Daniel, Hanani, Mishav, Azariah, you were still Mekadesh Shem Hashem. You still were Mekayim the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not dying. The mitzvah is willing to give up your life. The sacrifice of saying, yes, I am going to give up my life. So once a person makes that decision, he has already fulfilled the mitzvah. It's not a bracha l'matala. Even if it doesn't come to it, one still is Mekayim the mitzvah, and therefore the bracha is a valid bracha. So the Shla's opinion, and the Pischei Tshuva's opinion, and the Rikanti's opinion is that you do make a bracha, and the bracha is l'kadesh shemai barabim. Comes the Maram Shik, and the Maram Shik says not so fast. Maram Shik says that in his opinion, you do not make a bracha on Kiddush Shem Shamayim. Why not? He says very interesting svara. We know when the Rebbeinu Shalom was drowning the Mitzrim, the Malachi Asharis wanted to sing Shira. And Hashem said, Masayadai, Tovim Bayam, Ba'atem Oimim Shira. My creations are drowning. I don't want you to praise me now. Don't be singing my praises when my creations are drowning. Says the Maram Shik, let's make a Kavachomer. If you're not supposed to thank and praise Hashem when Rishaim are dying, Kavachomer, Ben Benoisho Kavachomer, when tzaddikim, when people are willing to give up their life, are risking their life, you think the Rebbeinu Shalom is happy about the hanhaga that he has to be manning the world at that time? Hashem is saying in Shamayim, don't sing my praises right now. This is not a time to acknowledge my gadlus. It's a little bit of a difficult svara, because you're not praising Hashem for the tzaddikim dying. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. When you do a mitzvah, you have to make a bracha. But the shita of the Maram Shik is you don't make a bracha on Kiddush Shem Shamayim. The Munkatcher in the Darkei Tshuva brings the shita of the Maram Shik, but he brings other poskim Namely, the Meiri holds you do make a bracha, and the Meiri says you should make the bracha b'simcha. Let's just note, the lashon of the Shlah HaKadosh is koidem sheyaharguhu yevarech b'simcha. You should make a bracha b'simcha. Maybe we'll talk about that more on Tisha B'Av. What do you mean b'simcha? Not exactly, not the happiest moment. Well, the Darkei Tshuva brings down the Shita of the Meiri, who says you make the bracha, but the Meiri says like this, that you only make the bracha if the intention of the goyim is lahavir al das. However, let's say the guy is trying to extract information from a Jew. And the guy says, give me the information, otherwise I'm going to kill you. So then, the halacha is, yehareg ve'al yavar, you have to give up your life. But since the intention of the guy is not to be maver al das, he's not trying to ruin the religion, so therefore, you don't make the bracha mekadesh shimcha barabim, lekadesh shemay barabim. It doesn't warrant that. It is a mitzvah, but the bracha is not going on that situation. Okay. But the Munkacher concludes, lahalacha, that you do make the bracha. He concurs with the Shlah. Amazingly, we know the story of Graf Patatsky, the convert in the times of the Vilna Gaon, who was the son of a famous governor, and he was close to the Vilna Gaon, and he converted, and the Christian authorities came, and they were going to burn him at the stake, and the Bal Yisoid V'Shar Sha'avoda ran to hear what is this tzaddik, what is Avram ben Avram going to do when they kill him? And he heard him say the words, and I believe I saw that Avram ben Avram asked the Gaon, and he heard him say with tremendous simcha, in a loud, resounding voice, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu, lekadesh shmoi barabim. Lekadesh shmoi barabim. So again, the nusach of the Shla and the nusach of the Rakanti. By the way, not everybody agrees to this nusach. Back to the Sefer Yosef Oimetz. The Yosef Oimetz again is Hagoyin Rav Yosef Yuspa Hen Norlingen. He brings down a whole very frightening nusach to say, and at that fateful moment, it should never come. He says that when a person's life is about to be taken away, you say, Elokai Avoisai, Neshama shenasata bi tahira unekia v'zaka. The soul you gave me is pure. Uv'yetzer hara lechlachtia, and I defiled it with the yetzer hara. V'timasiya b'chatai uvenavoisai uv'pshai, and I defiled it with my sins, hamarubim. And says the Yosef Oimetz, he says, I strayed, I violated your mitzvahs, and the time has come for you, Almighty, to take my soul. However, I know I know that you're going to return it to me one day. And then he says with the simcha of Rabbi Akiva, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu v'mitzvosav v'tzivanu le'ahoiv es Hashem hanichbad v'hanoira haya v'hoive v'aseh liyos b'chol v'avenu v'chol nafshenu u'lekadesh shmoi barabim Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh shimcha barabim. And then you say Shema. So basically you have various opinions. Maram Shik says, you don't make the bracha. You can't make the bracha. You don't even know that it will come to it. Secondly, the Maram Shik svara was that at a time like this, the same way you can't thank Hashem when the Mitzrayim are drowning, you don't make a bracha on Kiddushem Shamayim. Others, the Shla, the Rikanti, the Darkei Tshuva, they all say you do make the bracha, and the nusach is lekadesh shemai barabim, and then you have the nusach of the Yosef Oimetz. Now, it's very difficult to say, okay, so what's the bottom line halacha, It's not like you're going to see in the Mishnah Brura, a siman, when the guy comes, what nusach should you say? But I believe this is the closest we can have to a definitive answer regarding this nusach. There's a tshuva, like we mentioned in Shalas Tshuvas, Mima'amakim, where the Rav Ephraim Ashri, he quotes the nusach of the Yosef Oimetz, who we mentioned his nusach is, it's a lengthy nusach. Then the Shas Chuzmi Mamakim brings the nusach of the shla. But he sort of elaborates. Again, the shla's nusach is, you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Rabbi, so you could feel free to help yourselves, that the Shla HaKadosh says that the nusach is L'kadesh Shemoi Barabim. L'kadesh Shemoi Barabim. So the question is, why do you say Li and not Al? So what's the rule? We know we say on Tefillin, Lihaniach Tefillin. We know we say, when by Bris Milah, you say, Asher Al Hamila. So what's the rule? When do you say Li and when do you say Al? Now the truth is it's impossible to give a rule because there are a million exceptions to the rule. But this is the rule that most Rishonim hold of. The Riva and the Rosh endorses this rule. The Riva says that whenever it's a mitzvah that you have to do begufay and you can't appoint a shliach, you say Le. So you say Le haniach tefillin. But anytime it's a mitzvah that you don't have to do begufay, you don't have to even be there, then you say Al. So for example, tefillin, let's say you're tired in the morning. There's no app. They haven't invented an app yet that you could stay in bed and they'll find someone to put tefillin on you, right? It doesn't work. You got to put tefillin on yourself. You got to daven yourself. You got to learn yourself. So you say Le. When you put on tefillin, you say L'haniach tefillin. Masha'en kain, Mila, you don't have to be a mile. In fact, you don't even have to be there. So the question is, but there are about 1 billion exceptions to this rule. The Shel Rosh you say Al. So the answer is these are all good questions. On the Shel Rosh you say Al because maybe it's Soif HaMitzvah. It's a Soif HaMitzvah. And what was the other question? Netilas Yadayim, because you're not making it right away. Because you're not making it over l'asiyasim before you wash, because your hands are dirty, so it's after, so it's also beside. There are 1 million exceptions. There are almost more exceptions than the rule. The rule answers a few cases, but that's the rule. The rule is Li when you have to do it yourself, Al when you could point to shliach. Now, the mitzvah of Kiddush Shem Shamayim and sacrificing one's life for Hashem. If Chas v'Shalom, anyone is in that matzav, you can't say, hey John, I have a really great idea. I have this first cousin who's much more geschmack, much juicier than I. Maybe I'll give him a call. And, he always told me he likes a good mitzvah. You can't call your cousin and ask him, do me a favor, I have a really nice mitzvah that you might be interested in, and appoint the cousin to take your place. It's a mitzvah you have to do begufay. And therefore the Shla HaKadosh paskins that the correct text for the bracha is Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu lekadesh shemoi berabim. And Rabbi say, we said the Piskei Tshuva endorses the Psak of the Shla. One little clara that you could have over here is that there is a shita that any time a guy is mitzvah in the same mitzvah, you don't make a bracha. Now, does a guy have to sacrifice their life to sanctify the name of Hashem? In other words, somebody goes to a guy and he says to the guy, we know a guy who steals even a shava pruta is chayiv misa. By the way, a Jew's not to steal a shava pruta either. I see people go to the store, and there's this guy, he goes to the cherries, and he looks to the left, he looks to the right, and he pops a cherry. Why would that guy want to come back in a Gilgal just because he ate a cherry in the store? I mean, what in the world does this guy think? It's Geneva. So it's for sure worth a penny. He has to get rishus, He's looking this way and that way. Who's he looking for? I mean, if you're allowed to do it, then, Okay. But anyway, you're not to steal. But you're not chayiv misa. A guy who steals a shava pruta is chayiv misa. It's chayiv misa. But does he have to give up his life? In other words, does he have to sacrifice his life to not violate one of the Shem mitzvahs? It's a machlokes. So if a guy is mitzvah on Kiddush Hashem, then you can make the case that you would not make a bracha on Kiddush Shem Shemaim. Please enjoy the food. It's here. So if you're hungry, please enjoy. Okay. So that's one clear over here. But says Rav Ashri. Rav Ashri says like this, that in his opinion, the correct nusach of the bracha is the nusach of the Shla HaKadosh, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu, L'kadesh Shemoi Barabim. In fact, Rav Ashi writes a very frightening thing. Says Rav Ashi, that I saw that tzaddik, Rabbi Eliyahu from Warsaw, when I told him the psak, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, l'kadesh shmei barabim, he was saying it over to himself again and again and again and again, so that he should be fluent and familiar with the bracha, so that when the time comes, he'll be able to say the bracha properly. Can you imagine such a tzaddik? What's he doing in his last moments in life? He's chazering the nusach of the bracha, so that he could be able to make the bracha with the right kavanah. Well, some time passed, says Rav Ashri, and this Rebbe Eliyahu told me that he heard that Rebbe Chanan, when Rebbe Chanan taught his son the nusach of the bracha, he taught his son the nusach of the shla, lekadesh shemoi barabim, and that Rebbe Chanan said that was the psak of the Chafetz Chaim. So we have the final word. Chafetz Chaim, the Baal Mishnah Brura, says that the correct text of the bracha is Asher Kisham V'Soysav V'Sivanu Lekadesh Shemoi Barabim. And says Rabbi Ashri, I heard from the grandson of the Chafetz Chaim, from Rabbi Shiur Levinson, that he heard from the Chafetz Chaim that during World War I, Chafetz Chaim paskined that the correct bracha to be made at a time that should never come is Asher Kishanu V'Soysav V'Sivanu Lekadesh Shemoi Barabim. So that is the final halach on that matter, if we could say such a thing. Let me bring to your attention a very interesting Rashi. Rashi, on the words, the Nikdashti B'Soich B'nei Yisrael, Rashi says a halacha. Rashi says, Uchshu moisar atzmai, when a person gives up their life, Yimsar atzmai amanas lamos. They should give up their life on condition to die. Shekala, meaning, don't think, I'm not really going to be giving up my life because Hashem's going to make a miracle for me. You should go into it thinking you're not going to make it. Because anyone who gives up their life on condition that a miracle would happen, a miracle will not happen. Because we find Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, when they gave up their life, they had no intention of miraculous events, and the Rebbe Hashem saved them. However, the perfect example of this was who? Remember, where's the first Rashi who mentions this idea? By Avraham and Haran, right? Where Avraham jumped into the fire, not thinking he would be saved, and he was saved. And Haran said, Taka, you're going to be saved? I'll jump in. And he wasn't saved. So this is the halacha mentioned by Rashi. The Smag in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, in number 16, the Smag Mitzvahs HaSehei mentions this halacha, that when one is moiser nefesh, you should not be mechavein that you're going to be saved. The Smak also mentions this Indian, this halacha, al yimsar atzmai al manashe yaseloi nes. And the Darkei Tshuva, who's the Darkei Tshuva? Again, the Munkacher also brings down that when one is moiser nefesh, one should not be mechavein that they're going to be saved, but one should do it anticipating that they're really going to be sacrificing their life. Beautiful. It's important to know. It's a halacha. So what's the question? There's a mamish, a pela atzuma over here. What's the pela atzuma? If you go back to Rashi and Sefer Bereshis, Para Gimel Pasuk Ches, and don't ever forget this. Remember the Maramakim. Gimel Ches. The lashon of Rashi is Va'ani loy basi ela lepshutoi shel mikra. Rashi is not a Shulchan Aruch. Rashi does not give you halachas. Rashi has one objective: to explain the psukim. Nowhere does Rashi just say, by the way, when you wake up in the morning, you wash negel vaser, and then you say netil siyadayim, and then Rashi not Shulchan Aruch. He's a mefarish on Chumash. He's trying to tell you what he considers pshutoi shel mikra. Why does Rashi have to add on the pasuk v'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael? By the way, if a guy comes to shoot, don't be mechavin that you're going to be saved. Be mechavin that you're going to be sacrificing your life. It's an important halacha, but what in the pasuk is difficult that Rashi needs to mention this halacha? So this is a question of a number of achronim on Rashi. In fact, there are many perushim on Rashi. They came out now with Yud Aleph Perushim on Rashi, 11 commentaries on Rashi. So some of probably the two most famous commentaries on Rashi are, you have the Maral, the Gorarie, and you have the Mizrahi. Maybe the Mizrahi is the super commentary on Rashi. But then you have many other Perushim. You have something called Be'er Basada, you have Levush, you have Nachas Yaakov, and so on and so Sifsei Chachamim. One of the Rishonim wrote a Perush on Rashi, the Trumas Hadeshen. It's called Biurei Mahari. Those who are in Yoredea, you ever see Kasav Mahari? Who's Mahari? Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin. So he wrote a commentary on Rashi, and he's bothered by this question. What forces Rashi, who is a Mefarish, to tell me a halacha on the pasuk? And the Mahari says something very interesting. He says, the lashon of the mitzvah is a very unusual lashon. It doesn't say, by tefillin it says, ukshartem, you should tie. By sukkah it says, teishvu, right, you should sit. Why doesn't it say, v'takti shunu, or v'takti sheni, you should sanctify me? What's v'nigdashti? I will become sanctified. Right, it doesn't say by tefillin. Tefillin will have been worn. V'yislabeshut. No, it says you should wear tefillin. You should sit in the sukkah. You should learn Torah. So why doesn't it say you should sanctify my name? What does it mean? My name will be sanctified. Says the Trumas Hadeshen. You know why? Because the kavana of the pasuk is avada. There's a mitzvah to give up your life. But when it says, my name will be sanctified, what that means is, Hashem is giving you a promise that very frequently, when a Yid wholeheartedly is moiser nefesh, a miracle will happen, and they won't die. The Torah is giving a haftacha, and we'll talk maybe on Shabbos, maybe, about the Rishonim give a haftacha that when someone is moiser nefesh, al kiddush Hashem, there is no pain. The Marame Rutenberg writes, his Talmud, the Tashbates, writes, he heard from Marame Rutenberg, that when Jews are moiser nefesh al kiddush shamayim, a nes happens, and there's no tsar. And the raya is, everybody knows that if you put your finger in a fire, who doesn't scream, oy va'avoy? And yet, Nebuch, you see, Holocaust and other situations where they threw Yidden in the fire and nobody said a word. It's a haftacha that there is no tsar when a Yid is moiser nefesh. It's a haftacha from the Rishonim. Likewise, there's a haftacha that it is very likely and usual that when someone be'emes is moiser nefesh, Hashem will save them. V'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. And when a Jew is moiser nefesh, and then Hashem makes a miracle, God's name is sanctified when that miracle happens. That's what it means, v'nigdashti. You give up your life, I save you, my name is sanctified by performing that miracle. Oh, so Rashi is bothered by Akasha. Well, if that's the meaning of the words v'nigdashti, that it's a haftacha, that you won't die, then maybe the person who's moser nefesh is aware of that and could think, you know what, I'm not going anywhere. Therefore, Rashi has to say, even though the words of the pasuk are, you're not going to die, don't think that, as far as you're concerned, you don't know what's going to be. You're not going to make it through. An incredible explanation. We know, unfortunately, throughout history, miracles happen, but they don't always happen. Do they usually happen? I hope so. But do they? But then the Trumas Hadeshen, that's what the Trumas Hadeshen writes. The Yitzei Del Derech, Yitzei Del Derech is another Mefarish on Rashi. He says a different pshat, that Rashi's teaching the words V'nikdashti. V'nikdashti means you sanctify me by giving up your life. Now if you're thinking, this is going to be, what a show this is going to be, Hashem's going to, then you're not giving up your life. If you know you're going to be saved, if you're thinking, I'm doing this because I'm going to be saved, you're not sanctifying the name of Hashem. So the taich of the words, the nikdashti, is to be mechavin, that I'm being moiser nefesh and come what may. Let's end with the following story. One of the greatest Yidden who ever lived, the Baal Shulchan Aruch, the Kesef Mishnah, on the Rambam, the Beis Yosef, on the Torah, the Baal Shulchan Aruch. There's a fourth sefer that the Beis Yosef wrote. It's called Magid Meisharim. Beis Yosef had a malach. The malach came to learn with him. The malach gave him Musar. The malach taught him Hashkafa. The malach taught him Kabbalah. And one of the things the malach told the Beis Yosef on a Tuesday, the 7th day of Nisan, he said, by the way, regards from God, he says, the Mal says, regards from Ribbon Shalom and the Masifta Derakia. And by the way, the Mal says, they really like you up there. They really, you're one of their favorites. You know why? Because you're always learning Torah. And you're always doing tshuva. Now, to me, that's an amazing thing. The Ribbon Shalom loves Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo is always doing tshuva. What's Rabbi Yosef Karo doing tshuva about? He's doing tshuva. That's tzaddikim, they're always doing tshuva. And by the way, even though you have regards from Hashem, and they love you up there, and you're always doing tshuva, you should know one day you're going to burn in a fire, al kiddush shem shamayim, and just be ready. The question is, and this is the question of the Belza Rebbe in the Sefer Mahari Belza, Rabbi Shulami Belz, I believe, Beis Yosef never died al kiddush Hashem. He died in his bed at 87 years old, zaken v'savai yamim. Back then, that was a very, very long life. So what's going on over here? The Malach tells, beware of your fate. What fate? So the Belzer Rebbe said, he gave up his life many times and Hashem returned it to him. That's what he says. What that means, I'll leave it to you to think about. There's a sefer about who wrote the Zayar. Who wrote the Zayar, Rabbi Say? So, most attribute it to the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We've mentioned in the past, not everybody agrees with that. Rabbi Yaakov Emden certainly did not agree with that. And the Radal, Rabbi David Luria, wrote a sefer trying to prove that, in fact, the Zayar are the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And in this context, he discusses, well, who wrote the Sefer Magid Mesharim of the Beis Yosef? Did the Beis Yosef write it? Apparently, there's some degree of question whether the Beis Yosef wrote the Magid Mesharim. After all, it doesn't seem to be that consistent with his other writings, In fact, the Shulchan Aruch is very not Kabbalistic. Anything Kabbalistic does not appear in the Shulchan Aruch. For instance, Shulchan Aruch doesn't even say to put Negel Vaser by your bed. Why? Why not? It's based on the Zayar. It's not in the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is the halacha. And you look at the Magid Mesharim, it's Kulei Kabbalah. So there's a degree of question. Did the Beis Yosef really write the Magid Mesharim? So comes the Radal, and the Radal says, I'll prove to you the Beis Yosef wrote the Magid Mesharim, and it couldn't have been a forgery from someone else. Because if someone else would have wrote it, why would they write something that never happened? Who in their right mind would want to write a book and attribute to the Beis Yosef? So why would they put in that a Malach came and told the Beis Yosef that he's going to die al Kiddush Hashem? If you're trying to forge a book, why would you put in information that never happened? It must be that the Beis Yosef wrote it. Interesting argument. Well, it also didn't happen. But the raya that the Beis Yosef wrote is because who else would put information that never happened? And then he addresses, so why didn't it happen? What's the pshat? So he tries to say that all the Malach was trying to do was remind him to be makabel upon himself, that if the circumstance comes up, he should be ready for it, and by doing so, he'll be yotzei his kavana, and Hashem will consider it as if he did it. Also a very interesting approach. There's a sefer Mavar Yabok, where he writes as follows, that if a person davens with the right kavanas, and he says Shema, and we'll talk in a moment that by the way, when you say Shema, before you say Shema, you need to have two kavanas, just if you want to be yotzei. First of all, you need to be mechavin, you're being mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kriya Shema. B'di'evet, if you don't think that, there's a Chai Adam that says that obviously I'm trying to be mekayim the mitzvah, but l'chadchila, if you want to be yotzei l'chadchila, mitzvahs need kavana. Number two, you have to be mekabel upon yourself, oil malchus shamayim, the yoke of heaven. But there's another kavana we're going to see, that twice a day when you say Shema, you need to think and imagine that if you were ever put to the ultimate sacrifice, you'd be willing to give up your life al Kiddush Hashem. That's one of the kavanas to have when you say Shema. It's not for big tzaddikim. It is. It's for big tzaddikim, for little tzaddikim, for non-tzaddikim. It's for all Jews. Gentiles don't have to have this kavanah when they say Shema. A Jew, if you have a bris milah, and they named you at your bris, and your Sharma Torah mitzvahs is one of the kavanas that one needs to have when they say Shema. So where does it come from? Well, we'll see. This is not just in the Sifrei Kabbalah, it's brought in the halacha. But the Mavar Yabok writes that if a person's mechavein by Shema, by the way, when you say Tachnun, the Iker Kavana of Tachnun, so what am I doing by Tachnun? What am I putting my head down? The Iker Kavana of Tachnun is Ma Betza Bidami Beriditi Al Shachas. Ribbon Shalom, if it came to it, I would give up my life for you. That's the Kavana of Tachnun. If a person has these Kavanos, and then, even if a person leaves this world in a regular, natural manner, and they're mechavein, that their misa should be al kiddush Hashem, it's considered as if they died al kiddush Shem Shemayim. Okay. These are all Gahaibin Sfarim. These are not the typical Sfarim that we always learn. But the Rajba writes in a tshuva, and this is codified in the halacha. Zok the Rajba, let's read the words of the Rajba. V'haklal, look at number 25, the Tshuvas HaRajba. V'haklal, shetzrichin anu likbaya b'nafshenu. We need to establish in our soul, haskama muchletes, a definitive decision. B'chol eish shenikra akriya Shema. Anytime you say Shema, Sha'anu maskimin limsar kol tavosenu, that we would give up all of our desires, v'chishkei levavenu, and all of our wants, v'chol nafshenu, and our soul, ad netilas nefesh, to the point where our life is taken away, and our money, for what? Al yichud kedusha shemai. Says the Rajba, more than that. A person, when they say Shema, should imagine. Now, I don't mean to scare you. I'm just telling you what the Rajba writes. A person should imagine vividly, as if it came to it, and they gave you the choice. Yid, are you going to give up your life to keep your religion? You should imagine yourself when you say Shema, being Moisar Nefesh Al Kiddush Hashem, says the Rajba. The Pasuk says, Ki Alecha Hiragnu Kol Hayom. God, we die for you every day. Now, you can't die for God every day. You're not a cat. You only have one life. What do you mean we die for you every day? Says the Rajba, the meaning is, every day when you say Shema, it should be considered as if you imagine, you should picture yourself as if they're taking away your life, and you would do that for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Okay? I have to say, I was aware of this, and this is a kavanah that one should have when they say Shema. What I was not aware of was a halacha that I probably read dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and not until today did I realize the meaning. There's a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Samach Aleph. Yikra Kriya Shema Bekavana. Okay, that I know. You should say Shema with Kavana. Be'ema, Be'yira, Be'reses, V'ziyah. With fear and awe and trembling and sweat. I read that halacha many times in my life. I don't know if I was ever makayim it, but at least I read it. Okay, I know, when you say Shema, you should be afraid. You know what? I don't think I ever realized. What should you be afraid of when you say Shema? How should you be afraid? Like, what do you mean you should just be afraid when you say Shema? Of what? What do you mean say Shema sweating? You can't make yourself sweat. You can't say, okay, let's sweat now. It's not like you could decide to sweat. Sweating is not one of those things. You move around, you play ball, even ping pong sometimes you could sweat. But you can't decide to sweat. It's not a mental decision. So what's the mechaber mean? I have to say, I never realized this. And I read this Mishnah Berurah many times. And I never understood what the Mishnah Berurah was saying. Now I think I understand. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you know what the halacha means. You should say Shema with fear and awe and sweat and trembling. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the mechaber means is that since when you say Shema, you need to be mechavein as if they're taking away your life, that you be willing to give up your life for the Rebbeinu Shalom. If you're thinking for real and really imagining that you're being put to the ultimate test and that you're willing to give up your life and sacrifice your life for the sake of Hashem, that's a different Kriya Shema. That's a Kriya Shema of Ema, Yira, Reses, and Ziyah. Alright, Baruch Hashem, sometimes it takes 50, 100 times reading a halacha to understand the simple meaning of the words. What? 101. Halavai. That's what the Shulchan Aruch means. When you say Shema, you should say it bekavana, be'ema, be'yira, bereses, v'ziyah. Let's end with a Chassam Sofer. If I would have asked you before this year, when should you have this kavana that you'd be willing to give up your life for Hashem? In Shema. When in Shema? When you say the words, b'chol nafshecha, right? It says you should love Hashem your God with all your soul, with all your heart, right? Yetzirah, and all your money, and all your soul. Afilu noitel nafshecha. But that's not what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber is going on the whole Kriya Shema. In fact, it's brought down, you're supposed to have this kavana by the first pasuk. Why by the first pasuk? In the pasuk Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, there's nothing there that indicates that you'd be willing to give up your life for Hashem's name. And you ever wonder, why do we say Shema, right? A person in the last breath. Why are they saying Shema? Like, what does Shema got to do? Maybe we should say, Hashem L'kacha, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. Why Shema? It's an amazing Chassam Sofer. Everybody knows, if you look in the Sefer Torah, on the pasuk Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, there are two big letters. There's the big ayin, and there's the big daled. Spells aid. Meaning, when you say Shema, we're testifying that there's one God. Says the Heilig Chassam Sofer. The problem is, how do you give testimony on something? You can't say testimony about your brother, or your sister, or your father, or your mother, or your son, because you're negeh b'davar. If you stand to gain, you can't testify. So how could you say edus about Hashem? What do you mean? The Rebbeinu Shem's keeping you alive. You're gonna, Hashem, I testify you're one God. Pasal edus. Hashem's making you breathe right now. You stand to gain. He's your boss. You can't testify about your boss. Man, if you would see your boss handing you dollar bills, testify that I'm a good guy. How could you testify there's one Rebbeinu Shem? You're pasal eidos. The answer is, that's why you need to be mechavein, that you'd be willing to give up your life for Hashem when you say the eidos. Otherwise, how could you say eidos that there's one Rebbeinu Shalom? You're nageh b'davar. The Rebbeinu Shalom is giving you your life. This way, your Shema is only kosher if you're mechavein. Rebbeinu Shalom, I don't need anything from you. Even if you would take my life away, I love you so much that it's not dependent. It's eino tluya b'davar. I'm a kosher aid because I'm a chavein that ilu noitel as nafshecha. And if a person says a Shema like that, the Shema will be bekavana, be'ema, be'yira, bereses, v'ziyah. The Sefer Charedim writes that really you should have this kavana both by the pasuk of Shema or by the pasuk of v'chol nafshecha. L'maisa, it's not brought down in the Shulchan Aruch when to have this kavana. But one thing is for sure, says the Yosef Oimetz, that nobody should ever be in such a situation. We should all live ba'arichas yomim, v'shanim, b'brios, shefa, bracha, v'hatzlacha, and we should never know of such a circumstance. But we should take advantage. When a person says Shema, if a person is able to have this kavana, that afilu noitos nafshecha, and as the Rashba says, to imagine this tziyur, it's a very powerful zechus. It could save a person's life. Imagine if, chas v'shalom, there's a gezerah on a person. So if a person, by imagining that they would give up their life to the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Rebbeinu Shalom considers it as if they did, you're free. So kfar yatsa yidei chayvascha, you ready? Hashem considers it as if you went for Him. So to do something like that every day, twice a day, again, as Tisha B'Av is approaching, it's a day when how many hundreds of thousands, not millions of Yidden who are moiser nefesh, kiddush shem shamayim, but they say that the Beis Yosef was moiser nefesh kiddush Hashem, because even greater than dying al kiddush Hashem is living al kiddush Hashem, and we should be zoicha to live al kiddush Hashem b'toiv u'v'neimos ad b'yas gadol tzedek.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.